Good evening. Hi. We are going to get started just because we have a hard stop at 7 tonight, so I want to make sure we have plenty of time, even if people are still trickling in. Welcome. Thank you for being with us tonight on this very special occasion to hear from artist Sophia Almeria in dialogue with Arbella Bet-Shlimon, University of Washington Williams Family Endowed Associate Professor in History. My name's Nina Bezichnik. I am a senior curator at the Henry, and I had the great pleasure of working with Sophia to realize her exhibition, Not My Bag, which opened at the museum in July and is on view through this weekend. So if you haven't seen the show yet, please come back to see it this weekend before it's gone. Sophia flew in from London earlier this week, and I'm just so relieved and also really joyful that the weather remained in our favor for us all to gather here tonight and to hear from Sophia and Arbella around the cultural perspectives, histories, and methodologies that circulate in and through the exhibition. So as we begin tonight's program, I want to offer us a land acknowledgement to help frame our time together. So please take a moment with us to pause and reflect on the land we live, work, and play on. We at the Henry Art Gallery live and work on the unceded ancestral lands of the Coast Salish peoples and the shared waters of all tribes and bands, named and unnamed, including Squamish, Duwamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. The land acknowledgement reminds us of our connections, indebtedness, and responsibilities to the peoples and the more than human kin where we live and work. We invite you to join us in paying respects to elders past, present, and future, and to consider what paying those respects means within the work that we do as individuals and within institutional frameworks. I want to extend my thanks to Layla Taylor, Associate Curator of Programs, and Danielle Klang, Programs Manager, for organizing tonight's event, as well as Phil Stye, who is providing tech and live stream assistance. Thank you all. And before I hand it over to Sophia and Arbella, I want to offer a few introductory remarks about our esteemed speakers. Sophia Almeria is a Qatari-American artist, writer, and filmmaker who was born in Tacoma, Washington, and spent her youth in the region. She went to college in Egypt and has resided in London for over a decade. I mentioned this background because geographic and cultural dislocation play a role in the trajectory of Sophia's practice. And as such, her work explores the role of cultural inheritance, fragmentation, and memory in shaping narrative and a sense of self, all of which I'm sure we'll hear more about tonight. Across her work, Sophia interrogates the ongoing Orientalist gaze and residual histories of colonial authority in the context of contemporary culture and society. She weaves together personal lore and geopolitical legend in work that unspools the power dynamics of writing history with only unreliable narrators to tell it. She draws from multiple textual and material sources, as well as her personal archive and lived experience to create films, writing, and collage that challenge dominant narratives and confront problems of erasure and misrepresentation, and in so doing, create portals to envision alternative futures. Sophia studied comparative literature at the American University in Cairo and oral and visual cultures at Goldsmith University of London. She has exhibited her work internationally with notable solo exhibitions at Mataf Arab Museum of Modern Art in Qatar, the Tate Britain in London, and the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York, and group shows at the Institute of Contemporary Art in London, the New Museum in New York, the Palais de Tokyo in Paris, and the 2022 Venice Biennale in Italy, among numerous other venues. In addition, she is the author of 3 books, including Sad Sack, Virgin with a Memory, and the fabulous memoir, The Girl Who Fell to Earth, which we have on sale at the front desk, and speaks to her time growing up in Washington, and I really encourage you all to read it. Arbella Bet-Shlimon is a historian of the modern Middle East, and in addition to her position in the University of Washington's Department of History, she is an adjunct faculty member in the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Civilization and an affiliate of the Jackson School's Middle East Center. In her research and teaching, Arbella focused on the politics, society, and economy of 20th century Iraq and the broader Persian Gulf region, as well as Middle Eastern urban history. Arbella's first book, City of Black Gold, Oil, Ethnicity, and the Making of Modern Kirkuk, was published by Stanford University Press in 2019. And it explores how oil and urbanization made ethnicity into a political practice in Kirkuk, a multilingual city that was the original hub of Iraq's oil industry. Arbella received her master's degree in modern Middle Eastern and North African studies from the University of Michigan and her PhD in history and Middle Eastern studies from Harvard University. A Syrian American, Arbella was born in the Pacific Northwest and shares with Sophia a youth informed by cultural perspectives forged across national boundaries and within American media and popular cultural landscapes of the 1990s and early aughts. And I'm thrilled and thankful that they have come together here in dialogue with us tonight to share the ways in which individual experience have informed their scholarly and artistic work and fueled a commitment to combating stereotypes and false narratives about the peoples, histories, and cultures of the Middle East. So please join me in welcoming Sophia and Arbella and thanking them for sharing this time with us.
Thanks, Nina.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess we start by introducing ourselves a little bit. I mean, that was a great introduction, Nina. Thank you. I appreciate it. But do you want to say a bit more about yourself? Or?
I'm going to talk a lot tonight, so I'm going to skip that part, but I really enjoyed to know a bit more about you and your work, because learning more about that has been really exciting for me over the last couple weeks. We've been in dialogue.
Yeah. So it's been suggested by Sophia and others that I start by reading you just a short passage from my own work. So as Nina mentioned, I am a historian of Iraq, and I thought that I'd read you a short part of a short piece I wrote. So it's about half of what was a pretty short article that I was invited to write in 2022 by the British history magazine History Today. So they contacted me and they said, we're approaching the 90th anniversary of Iraq's independence, which was in October of 1932. And they just wanted somebody to write up 1,000 words. And I, thought about it, and I ended up, tapping into some of the themes of my work to write something that was a little different actually from what's in my book, but I think touches on a lot of what we're talking about tonight. And so I thought I'd read you a portion of some excerpts of that piece. So on October 3rd, 1932, Iraq joined the League of Nations. Symbolically, the Assembly's vote to admit Iraq, which terminated Britain's mandate over the country, marked its independence. But sovereignty remained elusive. For Iraq's monarchy, installed by British officials in 1921, independence brought a sense of anxiety, not triumph. The end of the mandate came with a condition. The Anglo-Iraqi Treaty of 1930 allowed Britain to maintain military bases in Iraq and kept the country dependent on British aid and advisors. The Iraqi monarchy and government officials worried about the country's vulnerability to foreign meddling. In response, they turned inward. Iraq mainly used its army and air force to police its domestic populations, including Kurdish nationalist rebels, Shia Arab tribes, and most devastatingly, the small Assyrian and Yazidi communities. In 1933, the Iraqi government ordered its newly expanded army to suppress a potential Assyrian uprising in northern Iraq. The Assyrians were a mainly Christian indigenous community who within Iraq's borders were largely refugees. The Ottomans had killed hundreds of thousands of Assyrians alongside Armenians in genocidal operations during the First World War. Throughout the mandate, many Assyrian men had been armed by the British. They now aspired to form an independent enclave in the mostly Arab and Kurdish region. The state's reaction was merciless. The Iraqi army pursued and killed Assyrians. The Air Force bombarded Assyrian villages, and irregular local forces joined to loot and destroy Assyrian homes and property, killing and displacing thousands. In August 1933, the army cornered hundreds who had fled the violence and taken refuge in the village of Simele, where it slaughtered them. The commonly accepted Iraqi claim that only a few hundred male combatants died is, according to survivor testimonies, a lie. When troops returned from the massacres, crowds greeted them with enthusiasm in Mosul and Baghdad. As far as most Iraqis were concerned, the Assyrians were imperial collaborators, and the army had eliminated a threat to the nascent state. More Iraqis than ever enlisted, but under the provisions of the 1930 treaty, the military they joined was armed and advised by Britain. The Iraqis who celebrated their military and eagerly lined up to enlist in the 1930s believed they were building a free Iraq. Yet 90 days after its Independence Day, Iraq is still dependent. It has suffered multiple invasions by Britain and more recently by the United States. Its larger neighbor to the north, Turkey, maintains military bases in Iraqi territory and bombards Iraqi villages in its war against Kurdish militants. Iran, its other neighbor to the east, funds and trains a coalition of militias which now constitute a substantial portion of Iraq's security forces. Ancient artifacts now enrich foreign museums. For more than a century, Iraq's ostensible partners and liberators have dominated it and extracted from it, not only its oil, but land, water, heritage, and talent. Iraq's youth still struggle for a sovereignty that is endlessly deferred. So, once I was invited to give some remarks at a UW event, and after I went back to my seat, the person running the event went up to the podium and said, "Well, thank you, Arbella, that was bracing." And I feel like that's basically what I just did. I feel like all my work sort of ends that way. But yeah, that was a bit of my writing, and it gives you some sense of what I write about when I write about Iraq. And so we hadn't met actually until yesterday, and when I was asked to do this event, we initially exchanged emails. And I felt like I needed to email you right away when we were first asked to do this event, because I think you got a kind of out of context email that said, "Hello, you're going to do this conversation with Arbella Bet-Shlimon." And my name is totally inscrutable to people because I'm Assyrian. I am, in fact, from the community that I just described in this excerpt. And nobody knows who Assyrians are, right? We're a very small minoritized community, and people just don't recognize the name. And so I kind of wanted you to know from the outset that I have this common experience of my parents are from Iraq and Syria. I grew up in this area, and so I kind of wanted you to understand who I was. And so I sent Sophia this email saying, "Hey, just so you know, I know my name is probably this kind of like black box to you, but I'm Assyrian, and I also, like you, spent my childhood I grew up in Seattle." And she wrote back very kindly, and you can tell them actually a bit more because you sent me an Assyrian song, which I'd actually never heard before, but my mom knew it and loved it, from the 70s. And then you also told me a bit about like your current TV writing project that you're working on.
Yeah, I really wish that we could have played the song, but I forgot to send the link. But if you want to look it up, it's called Ley Ley, Ley by Jermaine Tamraz.
Yeah, Jermaine Tamraz, yeah.
Really amazing haircut on the cover. But it is the one piece of Assyrian, I guess, cultural reference that I had, and I was excited to be able to send it to someone, finally. And yeah, last night we were chatting about everything, and the subject of my TV writing came up again because right now I'm working on a series for British television, which is something that is probably the reason why I live in the UK, because I became an Anglophile due to British Columbia television coming down here to Puyallup and watching the public programming that was bought from BBC. And now here I am writing something for it. So it's related to the subjects we'll talk about tonight because it's about the English, or who were at the time in the 11th century called the Mercians, invading Scotland. And it's the true story of Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, whose name was actually Gruach. And the English put Dunsinane under siege, and the tactics are 1,000 years old, ones that we're still seeing today, for displacement, imperialist tendencies, all of these things that Britain is very much still guilty of. England in particular.
So I just realized the clicker's over there. We should go over to, I think it's in the corner of the stage, but.
I'll try not to trip. Click away.
Yeah, because we should go to, we should go to the photo of the exhibit. So walking through this exhibit for the first time, I think I was struck by how long it must have taken for you to gather the materials to put this together. This is clearly not I've been commissioned, I have a concept, I just need to sort of get some stuff to put it together. But it was actually sort of decades worth of ephemera or stuff or whatever you want to call it. Junk, yeah, that goes into this. And you see it like displayed bit by bit, here in the room called Al-Atlal, which means ruins. But then the collages also have the same kinds of, stuff layered on top of each other, with also other elements, of course, that you've, original things that you've drawn and added. So I was hoping you could talk more about your method as far as collection, right, and what you're doing with that.
Yeah, a lot of I'm not sure how many of you have been in the exhibition already, but I'm very proud of this room in particular. That's our book. There's a little bit of a lag on this, but we'll just leave it there for now. Yeah. So I've moved a lot in my life and lose a lot of things along the way. And one of the reasons that I wanted to call this piece Al-Atlal, which will be explained in a clip shortly, is because the revisiting of this location, coming here to Seattle, coming to the Pacific Northwest to present work that I've been doing away from the place that I was born and brought up, felt very potent. And the works, this is one work technically, but there are so many sculptural pieces and also wall-based collages within it that are the accumulation of, as you mentioned, like 20 years of experience, of references, of learning, especially, of conclusions. And for a long time, this room was actually rather embarrassingly called the serial killer wall, because I didn't have a title. And I wanted to, I felt a bit like a rogue detective who was trying to piece together the story. And that's why there's also these sorts of like bits of red string drawn between different objects and different sort of little cairns and collections of things. And it's an extremely personal show. I really realized that today, walking through it with the people who have been invigilating for the last 6 months, which was a really exciting thing for me to be able to talk through them. But yeah, it's a bit like panning. I've never panned for gold, but I have panned through many, many pieces of paper. And one of them is up here. Why does it keep doing that? Anyway, this is an origin story. I'll just share this story really quickly. But those are all of my glasses from childhood, alongside a pencil that is stuck into a box of a game called Probe. Aside from the materials list, that's on the right side of the exhibition and is a literal expression of my origins, like the way that I came to making art. I hated math as a child, and upon being unable to finish an algebra problem, slammed my head down on a pencil that was very sharp, and right here in the middle of my forehead and my third eye, I pulled out a piece of lead. And ever since then, I gave up on that type of learning and devoted myself to art. I mean, it took a bit longer for me to be able to call myself an artist, and I still don't, but that, just to give you an idea, there are jokes within it for myself, and then there are also some more serious conclusions. We discussed this quite a bit. I'm not sure, like you mentioned, like a lot of it's quite opaque, I suppose, on arrival, but this was one that, this is your photograph.
Yeah, actually, I took this photo on my phone, and just before you guys walked in, as we were finalizing the slide deck, Sophia suggested that we actually put this on the slide deck, so yeah, I got it up there. Do you want to describe what it is? And I can talk about why I took the photo the way I did, but yeah.
This is a page that I found in the Panning in 2021. And it, actually I was going through trying to find the like when I found this, because I had recorded something about it. It was in May of 2021 when Israel was bombarding Gaza, and I found this piece of paper that I had written when I was 16 years old in September 2000, and it is really the first piece of writing that I ever wrote. I stayed up all night after having seen something on television. I had just moved to the Gulf, where I was going to high school, and I had seen a child, Muhammad Durra, murdered, killed by a sniper in his father's arms, and I was changed forever. And the seed of questioning and of doubt, which I think is essential to my practice, and I would argue any art, really just living. I think it's an important part of being a human, is being curious, but also questioning the reality that one is presented with. And so finding this piece of paper stating things quite clearly, which remain the same, was really profoundly upsetting thing. And I included it here in Al-Atlal because as like a sort of message, I suppose, even to myself, to continue reflecting the reality that I see. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we're similar ages, and I think that if you were a child or teenager when this happened, this was in September of 2000, at the very beginning of the Second Intifada, right, in Gaza, the death of Muhammad Durra. I think that I, as an Assyrian, so Assyrians are not Arabs, and I think a lot of Assyrians see Palestine as like an Arab cause. So I was definitely aware of Iraq. I knew all about Saddam Hussein. I knew all about the injustice of the U.S. sanctions on Iraq, as well as Saddam Hussein's genocidal actions. So I knew a lot about that. Like I had that consciousness of the region, but didn't know much about Palestine, which was really not dinner table conversation in my family. And seeing that footage, right, of Muhammad Durra, and if you have seen it, you know exactly what I mean. You will never forget it. For those of us who were very young at that time, I think was like our introduction to, it was a wake-up call, right, to realize the injustice of the oppression of Gaza and Palestine. And I had the same kind of emotional reaction, right? I didn't write a page, but I had the same kind of horror and shock of seeing that as a teenager. And you mentioned to me when we first had our first exchange that you had written this page and that it was part of Al-Atlal. And so when I went to the exhibit, the first round I went around in this room, I was looking for it and couldn't see it. And I thought, well, that's odd. I went and, kind of looked at one of the films and came back. And then I finally saw it, and it seemed obvious in hindsight because it was right behind a little lunchbox or something. I'm not sure what that is, a little case.
It's a suitcase travel version of Clue.
Okay, so a travel version of Clue that kind of, from where I was standing, looked like a tiny lunchbox. Anyway, but and then it has a beaded Palestine flag coming out of it, and then this framed page is behind it. And I'm not sure how clear it is from this photo, but it's quite high up. You'd have to be like over 7 feet tall, I think, to read it eye to eye. So I'm tall enough that I was able to kind of like hold my hand up with my phone really high and take the photo, and then I zoomed in to be able to read it. And that's actually the only way you can see it. And that and the mirrors in this room and the mirrors through the whole exhibit got me thinking about how you're playing with perspective in your work. Because this actually requires you to take an action, to really interact with it, to even know what's going on in this part of the exhibit. There's other places where you cannot see something without a mirror, or the mirror shows you a different angle, right? And other places where I definitely got the sense that I saw the object and then I saw like a simulacrum of the object in the mirror that was sort of different. And so the way that this whole exhibit forces you to think about perspective was really intriguing to me, and this was one of those moments where I thought about that, and then I took this photo.
Thank you for pointing that out, because I realized that actually even just in the last 24 hours, the sort of genesis of using mirrors in the work has gone from being completely sort of not subconscious. My first work with mirrors was called Mirror Cookie with the Chinese-American actress Bai Ling, and I wanted to do mirror work with her. It was a sort of like unsmear campaign. And that show had a lot of mirrors in it. And all of my work has a lot to do with perspective, and that definitely comes from this sort of bifurcated path that I've been on between the United States and the Middle East, and I found a middle ground in the UK. But the thing that was exciting about having a space as large as the gallery here was to be able to play with height and to be able to play even with light and the mirrors, in which, like, for example, there's another. It's kind of like a scavenger hunt. I hope that if you do go back to the space, if you manage to do that over the next few days, to look for a piece that has there's an old page of a book of a Rodin Gates of Hell sculpture, which sits in Zurich now, which is a place that I frequently go to for work now. And on the very top of it, there is 3 men, and I learned around the time that I was making this about that sculpture having been in the Twin Towers in a bank. And that particular Rodin piece, of all of the artworks that were in the towers, there was an ankle, a shoulder, and another piece of that sculpture that were retrieved. And in a mirror sitting against it, which sits like a portal or a door, you can see the 3 fates from the Disney movie Hercules. That is a McDonald's toy that I found in a trunk in my sister's garage. And putting those 3 things together also felt very profound, because American soft power and things like franchises like McDonald's and shopping malls and pop culture and media are all things which affected the world and the people who committed that atrocity. And so throughout the exhibition, especially on the shelves, if you look, there are very clear rhymes and reasons behind the mirroring and the placement of each of the objects. only a few of them are personal, like the childhood glasses, which obviously are also to do with my perspective being a little skewed.
Well, and let's thank your sister for the trunks in that room.
Yes,
actually.
thanks,
She's here,
Sarah.
so, yeah, we
Shout out
appreciate it.
Sarah and also Curtis, who brought them.
Yeah. But yeah, if you go into that room, you'll see the trunks that you can actually sit on, and then they too are containers. They're not bags, but they contain things.
Very rigid bags.
Yeah.
The
But
hope
yeah.
is that the whole thing can fold up into those trunks and then be reopened elsewhere.
Well, you were calling, like, to me, you were calling your method of collection of objects garbage collection. And, what better way to collect garbage than in a bag, right?
True.
But, the notion of collections in a gallery or museum comes up elsewhere in your exhibit, right? So one of the films, Tiger Strike Red, was partially filmed in a museum, right? And I was sort of struck by the contrast between how you presented a collection of sorts, right, with bags sort of all over the place as part of the exhibit, alongside a portrayal of a certain kind of extractive colonial collection, right, in a British museum.
Yeah. They really, one big bag. That was inside of the V&A Museum. It's the Red Room, if you've seen the exhibition. And there are many, I consider so many things a bag. I consider books, bags, films. There's a television that appears in several of the films, which is full, for example, of like snippets. One of my recurring themes in my work is sort of flipping through channels, and the sort of, I guess, the background radiation of information, especially like sonically, that happens just from being around information or transmissions that are not specifically curated or the algorithm hasn't brought them to you. And yeah, working with the V&A was interesting. But I'm very proud of that work. And in part, one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is there are references to T.E. Lawrence throughout both the collages that are in the front rooms and also in Tiger Strike Red in particular. And his, that's Lawrence of Arabia. I used to get confused between TH and TE, but T.E. Lawrence's poem, 2SA, that opens the 7 Pillars of Wisdom, is very much like a sort of key to a perspective that I try to undo in these works. It's a very colonial perspective. Some people say that that poem is 2SA. SA might stand for Sha'ab al-Arab, the Arab people, or it might be to his lover. It is a love poem, and quite a dark one. But there's this sort of savior complex that occurs across history, with all the way back to the 11th century, as I've learned recently. But that savior complex is a bag that I feel very much entrapped by. And so a lot of these works are around undoing that and escaping that particular, the constraints of that particular gaze, that particular narrative, and that particular institution in the case of the V&A Museum.
Well, and the film Tiger Strike Red like relentlessly mocks the British Empire and monarchy. Like it's quite sardonic, I guess. But did anybody from the V&A like watch the final product and reach out to you? Did you get a reaction or?
Yeah, I mean the opening at Venice was quite funny because the director, who's the ex-shadow cabinet minister for education, ended up launching into a 30-minute apologia for the British Empire at Venice, which was amusing and unexpected. But there was no way to make that film in the context of an institution that was so grand and not sort of poke fun for me. So that's why that's the attitude of that whole film is very juvenile. It's sort of Scooby-Doo in the museum, but with very potent acts. So for example, Aisha Hussein, who wields a sword in it, she's a martial artist of Indian and Omani descent. And she's in the Queen's Gallery undoing, and it's a sort of cord-cutting scene where a voice of a Welsh military commander who I know kindly read the T.E. Lawrence poem, and it slows down very, and his voice deepens in the way that that Hal in 2001 is undone by Dave. And there's this sort of evocation of that occurring in that time, in that space, and of Aisha even being in that space. And her mother had passed away a few days before, and she still came and did that. And it was, in many ways, a tribute to her mother when she performed that piece in that space, which is absolutely fraught to this day. Even every single gallery in that space has a keeper. So there's the keeper of Asia, who we had to get permission from to shoot certain objects, and who's a specialist, and she was questioning Aisha's origins, you know, like whether she knew what kind of sword this was and stuff, and it's a British lady of a certain age who didn't seem to think that that was odd. So yeah, there are a lot of things that we're living with and inside of now still that feel like a continuation, and that not much has changed.
Yeah, and the sword fighting in the film is incredible. If you take some time in the Red Room, make sure you see that. It's just incredibly skilled. And it's cathartic. I mean, for any Iraqi or Assyrian, right, to, you know, you can relate to your artifacts being in a British museum, and yeah, it's really something to see. You have a clip from one of your other films that I know you wanted to discuss. You have that queued up to play.
Yep.
Yeah.
So this explains Al Atlal, and just to say a quick word, it's the voice of Atela Adnan, who also is very present in my films. She recorded this piece that I wrote for her not long before she passed away. And yeah, it should illuminate that room that we've been talking about.
Al-Atlal is one of the major themes of Arabic poetry. The ruins, when open a qasida, these old poems usually end as petitions to patrons, but they almost always start the same. The lonely lover is in pursuit of the distant beloved. Crossing desert, they come to an abandoned encampment and directly address the traces they find in the sand. These remains conjure nostalgic memories of the ashes of a home fire. The poet can never return. Love has taken them, and they have taken us to the tender point of the ruins. It's beautiful.
Thank you. And that is Soundgarden playing now, which maybe brings us to the works in the front two rooms. Thanks, Phil.
Yeah, and the works in the front two rooms have these like a 90s pop culture theme.
That's you.
Yeah, that's me. Yeah, so we put this was the point where I think we thought let's talk a little bit about our younger selves at some point in this. So we put a couple slides up in here, and
Which is perfect, actually.
Yeah, the 90s Pacific Northwest theme kind of fits, but this is actually not me in the Pacific Northwest. If you're kind of looking at that like weird shirt I'm wearing, so this is in Damascus. So I included this because I wanted to include a photo from the first time I went back to one of my parents' home countries. So my parents, when they left Iraq and Syria, my mother's from Iraq, my father's from Syria. Assyrians are a transnational community who've been displaced multiple times over, so they're from a lot of different places. So neither of my families actually has deep roots in either of those places. My mom's ancestors were from an area near Lake Urmia and what's now Iran. My father's ancestors were actually from Hakkari, which is now in Turkey, but their families ended up in these places. And then my parents themselves left Syria and Iraq, and I don't think they really put those places behind them. Neither one has actually ever been back to their own home country since they left, and I don't think they ever expected their kids to want to go back, and my brother certainly didn't. But I did, right? The moment I was old enough, I started traveling back to the region. And so this was my first trip by myself to Syria. I was 19. So that's me in a little heritage house in Babtuma in Damascus. And this was, not that you can do the math, but it was before 2011. So this was, before the war started. But so this is our
Do you think that moment really changed your perspective? Because I know for a fact that, as I mentioned before with that page, there was the absolute split in my understanding of the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a very different perspective, and I was stumbling around a lot of the time, not even knowing what I was doing. Some well-meaning person gifted me that sort of see-through thing, which I put on top of a shirt. And
I think you look fab.
Yeah, I think it was like, and it has you can't really see it in the photo, but it has little rhinostones on it. I think that was sort of fashionable in the early 2000s in Syria. I guess that was something you would wear. But it was. I felt like I didn't know what I was doing half the time, really. Just, it felt
Same,
so
still.
New. Yeah. A real shift in perspective, if you will, yeah.
I love Damascus.
We do have a photo of you.
Yeah, this is a joint roasting here of our young selves.
There we go.
My favorite picture that I received recently of my graduation with my aunt, who's the same age as me. And I just thought it was a really funny picture. And I also think it's something that's important to me, especially in contexts like this, to declaw the formality a little bit, because it's funny sitting up on a stage.
Yeah, we had to do this, had to do the kind of self-humility, but I love that photo. And so this is your high school graduation, is that right?
Yeah, that was high school. And it was a year before. So one of the things that did come up that we wanted to mention also was around, that period being one, certainly for me, that was, I guess, an awakening. And I know that many of you here will know of Rachel Corey, who was from Olympia. And that is something that is really resonating with me again, her martyrdom and her death, or her killing. by Israel. And that is, Palestine is really at the core of a lot of the works in this show. If you've seen Beast Type Song, it's very present. And it's something that I want to talk about more because I came to that subject having been here in the States and having seen only certain tellings, and also having a family here who have Christian Zionist leanings. So family conversations at the holidays were always very interesting, and I hadn't heard anything else really. My family in the Gulf didn't talk about it so much. So I really came to the subject on my own. Went to university in Cairo, and that was the year that happened, that Rachel was killed, and then went to my first protest, and I've been to more protests in the last 3 months than I've been to in my whole life. Yeah.
Yeah, and Rachel Corrie was killed, actually, I think people often forget, it was the same month that the US invaded Iraq. I was in college, I think you were in college. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was in college by then as well, and yeah, that was a real shock. And she was killed in Gaza as well. And yeah, and that was one thing I couldn't help but notice. I mean, it was one of the first things I noticed going through the exhibit was how Palestine was at the heart of it, right? And comes up again and again. Even if it's not the central subject, it's a constant theme.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it infuses everything. I feel like really finding that page, I encourage everybody to look back at things that you've written or keep a record, because sometimes it is a compass when you're lost. And finding these clues, and then also looking back at these 3 films and seeing the patterns that run throughout them. Often when I'm creating, for lack of a better word, or making a work, I'm quite unconscious of what I'm doing until later, because it's a sort of fugue state that ends up being needed to finish. And I'm sure that will happen with this show also someday. But for me, the struggle against colonialism, imperialism all over the world, but in particular in Palestine, is a key to a position and a perspective that I do feel quite rooted in. It gave me, in a way, a home, ironically, to place my heart in. And one thing that I've been thinking about a lot this time with what's happening with the bombardment and the ongoing genocidal actions of Israel is how we wouldn't, I feel that without what happened with Black Lives Matter in particular, a lot of language to talk about this wouldn't be quite as widely used or understood. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I feel very strongly about also, because it felt almost as if the waking up to the truth of what is happening takes language sometimes to hold it, and dialogues and conversations around it. And that very much, I feel like, is, a beautiful example of the ways in which solidarities around injustice can inform our reality, hopefully. I mean, we'll see what happens at the ICJ.
Yeah. I mean, I think for so many of us, and I think this is relatable, that, solidarity arises at moments where you have the realization that certain injustices are linked and similar, right? You mentioned Black Lives Matter, right? I think that there was a realization among many young people, activists, older people too, right? Looking at the present structures of racism in the United States and anti-Blackness and police brutality. And you see, a police officer shooting an unarmed Black person, for example, and then you see a Palestinian shot at a checkpoint in the West Bank, and you realize, well, these are actually very similar situations, right? Where you have a highly securitized system in which people are living under a sort of constant grinding, level of violence, right? And I think that this was, as you said, a moment of realization, a moment of solidarity, certainly in these last few years between Black Lives Matter and between Palestinians and people who care about their cause. And yeah, these last few months, I look at siege, starvation, children killed in front of their parents, parents killed in front of their children, and I just go, this happened to us, right? Assyrians went through this in 1915 and 1933. This, what I just read to you, right? This happened to us. We're all, nearly half the Assyrian population was killed in World War I, and just about every one of us who's alive today is descended from those orphaned children, right? Our great-grandparents were those people. It's really, sometimes I'm beyond words, seeing it. That realization that these oppressions are similar, that they repeat, that they're linked, is so important, I think, to everything I do, right? To my teaching, to my writing, to my work. So,
The repetition is important to notice because it's not normal, and it is unfortunately actually frequent and repeating, but I feel like we gotta evolve a little bit. We all know that. Ain't nothing new I'm saying here, but there is a clip, perhaps to close out. If there's any questions, I believe they can be written down. But I'm just gonna play a little clip. I think it's the next one, but we'll find out shortly.
we're here to see what's on this.
I remember the first time that I heard the word drone,
I think
it was
you
really
gotta
surreal
switch.
because I had only ever heard that word in the context of, I don't know, Star Wars or like the Cylons in Battlestar Galactica or something. I had some friends who had gone to Bethlehem and they had ended up in a siege situation in the Church of the Nativity, and I just remember this very intense shift in my perspective, or a split, I guess, in my understanding of the way that reality works in language. And they had been in the church for several days. There was a television with cable news on the monks' side of the complex, and they saw one of the Palestinians in the courtyard hanging up some bloody sheets, and a drone came over the wall and sniped him down. They then immediately saw on the news that it was being reported as if this person had been shot in a crossfire. So that was my sort of neo red pill, blue pill moment that I will never forget.
The sun is a camera which operates only in black and white.
So
White.
you can chop it now. Thank you.
From their eyes, nothing remains.
Well, you could hear it, which is the important thing. That story. And I made that film in 2019. 2019. And so that was before I found that piece of paper, which was actually my red pill, blue pill moment. And that was the one that I remembered in 2019. So again, before we go to questions, I just want to send an invocation to everyone here to look at your archives or keep one, because the recording feels really important, the witnessing of yourself. I feel like that's been my route to evolving my understanding of the world and of people, and of art, for that matter. And I'm really grateful to have been here, and I apologize for the slideshow being a little rickety today. That's my bad.
So the clip we just heard, you heard the audio but didn't see the visual. That's from Beast Type Song, right? So that's the film that plays in the big dark room. If you're going to come back and see the exhibit, you will hear and see that clip in the film, and definitely seeing the visual will be compelling. So
Yes.
yeah,
I appreciate you all coming.
yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sophia and Arbella. Thank you all for being here. We have, for those of you who came, we have you in, let me just breathe for a minute, because I'm still taking a lot in. If you have a question that you wrote down on a question slip, we are happy if you could just pass it either to one end of the aisle or the other. Danielle and myself will collect, or Isla will collect question slips. And then I will pass them up to Sophia and Arbella for them to kind of choose which questions they want to take tonight. So while you pass in your question slips, I'm going to ask a question. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
I think, if anything, you've both shared so much of yourselves and with the audience tonight. And I think one of the things that I'm most even curious about, that I'd love to hear from each of you, because I've been so lucky to be in conversation with you, is if from your positionality, right, as a teacher, right, and a writer, as an artist and a writer. I would love for you to just kind of maybe share like another outgoing message to folks, like of what you want folks to leave here with tonight. You know, what's important to you that they take with them.
I mean, I guess when we were thinking about, you know, we do very different work, and when we were thinking about what we have in common, I think it's the starting point of crisis. So often in my work, whether it's teaching or research, just like any historical question I start with is a moment of, well, you know, this looks awful, right? Whatever it is, whatever sort of crisis it is, it's, you know, something's gone wrong here, right? In the case of Kirkuk, but the first sentence of my book is Kirkuk is a city in crisis. And, you know, you start there and you go, how did we get here? And by looking at how we got here, it shows that this isn't the way it had to be, and there might be another way to go forward, right? And to me, I think that's the promise in starting with the question of a crisis, and then realizing that all crises are manufactured, right? And then using a method, whether it's history, whether it's garbage collection, or whatever you want to do, to understand how there's actually possible alternatives, right? Possible alternative futures.
Yeah. 10,000, yeah. Crisis is definitely the root of action.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions? Okay.
I guess we get to look through them.
Yeah,
See
here,
what
we'll split them.
answer. Yeah.
It's like tarot reading.
I got three, you got three, so let's look at.
I'll read mine. Are you concerned in this atmosphere to be canceled as an artist for speaking out? Good question. Thanks, whoever asked. I'm not concerned for myself. I'm concerned about the atmosphere, which feels very much like McCarthyism. The silencing I've witnessed, especially with my Jewish peers who have been very directly threatened and have had things canceled. I think that, I think that that is really not fair. And they're the ones who are being
specifically targeted, I think, because I've been speaking openly about Palestine for a while. So I've already been canceled by whoever would cancel me right now.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where I am too. I teach the history of the Middle East. Anyone who wants me to stay quiet on that topic is more than a decade late, because that's what I teach about. So yeah, if they've already canceled me, fine. So I actually have a couple questions here that are distinct, but they're both about your method. And I think although they're distinct, they're related. So I'll put them together. One is when collaborating with actors, how much of themselves and their ideas do you put into the work? And also, can you talk about the role of montage or juxtaposition in your work as a political and critical strategy?
Oh, nice. Who's the editor in the room? The actors are very, very involved. I don't know which one I should talk about, actually, because there's a recurring cast, especially in Tiger Strike Red and Beast Type Song. Yumna Marwan is the one who was the photograph and who's in the posters around Seattle. And I met her because she was cast in a television show that I'd written. And that's what that experience of having a script. Essentially, at one point, the story editor, who was this very venerable story editor in the UK who worked on Killing Eve and many things, was yelling at the producer saying, "You're colonizing this." They were like, "We know we're colonizing the scripts." And she's like, "Yeah, bloody ah." And so I met Yumna through that, and then through conversations with Yumna about her experience on that shoot, that film, Beast Type Song was made. So that Yumna was absolutely essential to that, and really she had kind of free reign with what she wanted to do. Elizabeth Peace, who's also in that, and who also plays the vampire librarian in Tiger Strike Red. Working with her is always a pleasure. She's also a director and writer. Yeah, always. I really enjoy working with performers and actors because they imagine things that I never could. It's kind of like an architect and someone who's doing construction. And I think the construction worker is really the one with the skill. The other question was about montage. I work with editor on these larger films named Leo Parmentier. And we now have a very psychic sort of connection with montage and with constructing these things. I could answer that question better in more detail, but I'm aware of the amount of sticky notes. So whoever you are, come up afterwards.
Do you want to ask?
Sure. What was the process like for crafting the sound effects soundtrack? With Fatma, okay, so the sound design in both of those films is an essential layer and is full of references, especially Tiger Strike Red. It's a sort of almost like a radio channel flipping between all these different references. And they're also, very difficult to get the sound right in this space. I've discovered over time of installing them over and over again. But for me, it's similar to the collages. It's voice notes, for example, things that I've heard like in the street, songs that the lyrics of which might like float to the surface when I'm writing. There's often like a repeating or recurring phrase that I've had to like search or ask people, what is that song? So the sound design process is very much like a simmering for me, and a way to create the atmosphere of the spaces, the architectural spaces that are in each of the films. Next one.
Yeah. So this question is about the exhibition title, which refers to the Ursula Le Guin essay, Carrier Bag Theory of Fiction. And could you please expand on your interest in that essay and why it's gained traction in contemporary art more broadly?
Yes. Well, Ursula was and is a giant, a thinker, an activist, and an inspiration to me, and I'm sure maybe to some of you if you brought that question up. The carrier bag is, for those of you maybe who don't know, carrier bag theory of fiction is based on the carrier bag theory that, which is I think a paleoanthropological theory about how the first tool was not in fact a weapon or a spear or a times-killing arrow, but a bag to collect things in. And so not this sort of masculine narrative thrust, but a non-linear way of telling a story. Which is interesting because I just remembered a phrase that's been coming up a lot lately, non-linear warfare. More to think about for me later. But my books are very much try to employ that method of just bringing together disparate moments or beats so that it leaves space for the reader to enter and come to their own conclusions. It's not telling you what happened. I try to humbly not do that, even though I have shared with you my very clear opinions about certain things. It's always with the caveat that I don't know. And that's the thing that I love the most about the carrier bag theory of fiction is it's an entry point for you, viewer or the watcher. Speaking of watchers, my favorite question so far, was Leonardo DiCaprio's eyes gouged out related to pulling out a savior's eyes? Love that question. And I also love the read of it because I had not thought of that. So thank you for the reference. I was not consciously doing that. I was in a fugue state. Clearly it's some kind of an instinct that I'm not proud of. And then where did you find the Edward Said shirt? So that's an exciting question also for me because that is a vintage Badoon magazine shirt, which recently was reissued. They printed a new run of them. They should still be available. So if you go to badoon.com, you too can have a listen to what Edward said pun t-shirt. But that's one of those things that I've had with me for 20 years. And Badoon magazine is the magazine that gave me my first opportunity to be published. So that's why that's there. No more? Yeah, well, I'll read it. When was the moment you first felt belonging in the art community? Ooh. Do I feel belonging? I'm not sure. Does one ever really belong to an art community? I think that part of the point is to be an outsider. But I'm very blessed to have a lot of wonderful collaborators, and I think probably in the last 4 years, I've been collaborating a lot with artist friends, and I just this last year spent 9 months making a new film, which will hopefully be done in May, with 9 other video artists, including Martine Sims and Ryan Tricharton, who is here to support Raoul in his show downstairs, which is really fab, and a variety of other people, and that has been extremely healing post-COVID to be with colleagues and peers and just thinking about what it means to make a film. And that film is an exquisite corpse, so I have no idea until it's done what it's going to look like or what it's going to be like. So keep your eye out for that.
Yeah, so there's another question here on your work. Can you speak more on your snippets part of your practice? I personally enjoyed and resonated with this approach in your practice and felt like it was tied to Mark Fisher's theory on digital oversaturation. This person also wants to know if you've worked with Mark Fisher.
I did not. I did not have the opportunity. I have read his work, but I actually haven't read that, so I should. Thanks. Also, excited to learn more. The snippets relates back to the Ursula Le Guin, I think. And it's also, I think, related to the, and maybe Mark Fisher talks about this, but it's very much related to the experience of the sort of post-millennial moment of not being able to focus on any one thing, which is a sort of, I believe, a reason why so many of our generation were prescribed ADHD drugs, for example. It's very clear, like, this internet is coming. We won't have good little worker bees. That's my conspiracy theory, which I'm sharing here publicly. But I think it's very much related to that experience of, the lack of silence. It's constantly noisy. It's a relentless time to be alive and swimming in this information sea. And I'm going to literally go home and read that Mark Fisher. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
That's all the questions we have, so thank you.
Testing. There we go. The museum closes at 7. It's about 7:45, so just wanted to let you know what time it is. And